Welcome to today's podcast from Clinical Psychology Today. Today we interview Dr. Mally Coyne, broadcaster, clinical psychologist, and author. We hope you enjoy. Zoom. Okay. So all going well, Dr. Mally Coyne. We are now starting off this podcast, and I just want to begin with some introductions. And thanks so much for joining us to do this Clinical Psychology Today podcast. In fact, our first video one as well, which is, I suppose, symptomatic of the kind of new circumstances we're in right at the moment. But really, I don't know, in some respects, it feels like you don't need any introduction, but there may be some people who've not come across you so far. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Mally Coyne, clinical psychologist, author, NUIG lecturer, and I suppose somebody who's known to many others from your different media appearances across both local and national radio and on TV as well. So thank you for coming and joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here, Patrick. It's great.
It's a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure. Again, Mally, I know you reasonably well, but I guess bearing in mind those who wouldn't particularly know you, can you say just maybe a little bit about your own path into clinical psychology, given that it's kind of Clinical Psychology Today podcast? What brought you into this strange and weird profession that we both engage in? And then we can talk maybe a little bit more about how you then found your way into my media work and also your interest in infant mental health at that stage. But what attracted you into this kind of crazy work at the beginning?
I did psychology from the age of 15 in Korea. I lived there. My dad was a diplomat. And I always knew from a young age that I would enter the helping professions. And when I was younger, when I was a child, I used to speak about being a pediatrician. So I had an interest in working with kids, and it was in a kind of health professional type of way. But then at the age of 15, I got interested in psychology, and I was a peer counselor in school, which meant that I was helping out peers and kind of really involved in that. And then I got into psychology in Trinity, and you remember that because we were both in the same class. Mm-hmm. And so that was 94 to 98. And then from that time, I thought I do want to work clinically with clients, and children were always probably my biggest interest, because I just felt like so much change can happen with kids, in terms of helping children themselves and building them up, but also in terms of supporting their parents. I thought there was a lot of change that was possible. So then clinical was what I wanted to do, but obviously it was very difficult path to follow even back then. So I went and did a research master's that I had done a study on depression and anxiety and personality constructs in St. Pat's and St. James's. And then I worked my way doing there weren't many AP jobs back then. Sure. So I did do an AP job, but a lot of it was getting experience working with people with disabilities and as a care worker, and working with young offenders and working with children in care. And then I eventually got into clinical in Galway in 2003. But so it definitely is a career that I've loved pursuing. I then obviously did my clinical training, and I did I was working in NUIG for about a year as a clinical coordinator. So I was very much involved in the clinical course and enjoyed that at the time, and I still do lecturing there in NUIG. So I know the path it takes, and I know it's very different now for people. It's probably even more competitive, to get into clinical, but I do believe that if you're really passionate about it, that it's important to follow that passion. But I think obviously counseling psychology is something else that I could have done. But I'm really happy with my chosen career.
Great, fantastic. I mean, that passion still shines through. A decade and a half, almost now qualified.
You're making me sound so old.
But I suppose I'm also curious about the kind of transition onto doing maybe a bit more media work as well. Now, in one level, I think there's like a huge agreement about how crucially important this work is, both for clinical psychology in general, just to get a voice out there, but also in terms of for the community to share, to give psychology away, as they say, to kind of share a little bit of what we know that seems to help. But again, the path into media isn't easy. We talked a little bit there about the path into clinical training itself. but even fewer numbers tend to then move on to actually doing ongoing media work. And so why did you think that, or what attracted you to going that particular
Yeah.
direction?
When I applied to do psychology back in '94, I had actually also applied to do journalism.
Okay.
So journalism was definitely like a second type of career that I would have liked, because I really enjoy writing. I enjoy being given a task like, you've got 24 hours to write a 1,000 word piece on why teenagers kill. I had to do that for the
Yeah.
Anna Kriegel case, for instance, and that was pressure, because it was
Mm-hmm.
like, how do you write something that's, has psychological evidence, is respectful to families, and within that time frame. So I like a challenge. But I just thought, Padraig, because the work that I do, I feel like I'm repeating a lot of the same things. I'm doing a lot of the same things with families. Of course, I tailor it according to their individual situations, but I just felt like there's a lot of information that we have as psychologists that is so shareable, it's so useful to people if it's broadcast out there. And I can understand why not everybody is comfortable doing that, or going out into the media, because you are exposing yourself and you are making yourself a bit vulnerable. And for sure, there are people that like you and people that don't like you and are very vocal about that at times. But I just felt that the trade-off, it was really important that I enjoy speaking, I enjoy writing. I'm really fascinated by radio and television and journalism generally, that I just thought, you know what, I might as well give this a go. But it hasn't been an easy kind of process. I've been at this for 5 years, and I think people mightn't realize that, you start really small, and then you kind of, I always wanted to write a book, so I knew that hopefully that opportunity would emerge for me. But yeah, I suppose it's just about even honing now what I agree to do and what I don't agree to do, because you
Okay.
don't want to be commenting on every single thing. I want to have a certain level of expertise in the area and not just be commenting, because the media are always just looking for a 5-minute kind of snapshot that they can, and they don't really care too much about the topic some of the time. So there's been some projects I've enjoyed more than others. Like lately I did Big Year, Big School, which is a lovely documentary.
Which is my personal favorite of the pieces you've done. Yeah, it's amazing work.
Yeah. For me, that wasn't work. That was like the most amazing project to be part of, and it kind of brought me back to Sheila Green and her developmental psychology lectures in Trinity that we all attended on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., right? Or was it? Anyway, and no lectures for the rest of the day. But no, definitely, like for me, developmental psychology and the early years, I am absolutely fascinated by that area. And so when they asked me to do that, Coleman Noctor kindly gave them my name, and that's why they contacted me. And it was just the most brilliant project to be part of.
Yeah, no, and I very strongly encourage anybody to check out Big Year in Big School. It was just an amazing, amazing documentary. So really, and the characters were very engaging, actually.
Yeah, they were. They really were.
Lovely to see the psychology insight brought in too. An awful lot there in what you're saying, Mally, and I just want to kind of get into it a little bit more, because you mentioned the kind of mixed responses that sometimes can arise when one takes up kind of media work. And I think that does put some people off, that kind of sense that you might put yourself in a position of receiving negative feedback, either on social media or elsewhere. How's that been for you, or how have you not allowed that to get in the way of the work?
You're not always successful at not letting it get in the way. I'm thinking back to an example. I won't be too descriptive about it, but I had commented on something on the radio, and I had read the paper that they had given me to read, and then I commented on it. And then I started getting these tweets from people that I actually knew and that could have come to speak to me directly, but decided to tweet instead. And I just found that really difficult. But it did teach me a kind of a lesson in that, before you comment on something, make sure you also know the counter argument. And so therefore, if they only give you a few hours to make a comment, that, and it's kind of an area I've shied away from since. And the area actually is the impact of social media on kind of teenagers' well-being. There's very opposing viewpoints.
Okay.
Twenge has a particular viewpoint that there's definite causality between social media and children's and teenagers' anxiety and depression, based on a longitudinal study. But then there's a lot of people who say there isn't evidence for that yet. So it's an area that I kind of shy away from a little bit more. So it's taught me in a way to, say yes to the things that I feel I can really talk about, and then decline things that I feel like could be contentious and that could get me into hot water, because the media do like their headlines, and they like using a small snippet of what you've said without context. And you just have to be careful about that. But it doesn't stop me. In fairness, for all the stuff that I've done, I haven't really had much negativity. I've been lucky.
Okay, so that hasn't gotten in the way. And what's kept it going? What inspires you to continue doing media work? Why continue doing it?
Because I'm just really passionate, Padraig. Like during the lockdown, like I've had involvement with A Lust for Life since the very beginning. They're a charity, a mental health charity, and I've done stuff with them for years. And during the lockdown, I just felt like parents were really struggling. Like I get parents who contact me on my email, because I have an email that's out there for parents, and I do give recommendations. I don't get into therapeutic stuff because I don't work privately, but I would give suggestions. And like there were parents really struggling out there, and I just thought, if I can do a half an hour Facebook Live every Wednesday night and support parents, then why, from my garden room, why wouldn't I do it? It just feels like, if I have this knowledge and I have this burst to get it out, and I think it helps people, and clearly it does, then why wouldn't I? Do you know, it just feels like the most natural thing for me to do that. For me, it's the same as teaching. When I'm in front of a class of clinical students, which I was a few weeks ago, I opted to either do an online one-day lecture on infant mental health to the first-year clinical students, or would I do it in person with the visor and the mask and everything? And I just wanted to do it in person. Obviously we were 2 meters apart and everything, but I just thought, if I can, and I loved that day. It was showing videos about babies and their mental health from the UK, and just brilliant kind of conversational tools, and teaching them about a subject that they didn't know a whole lot about, and then also bringing in my clinical kind of the experience I have of working with the Children and Young People Services Committee in Galway, and the projects we've been involved with in terms of public health initiatives to do with building a happy baby and bringing baby bonding into Galway. So it just brings all my different bits of interests together, and I do love imparting knowledge. I mean, teaching, my brother is a teacher, my sister's an interpreter, so we kind of all have that in us to talk, maybe. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, and certainly also really speaks to that kind of broader ethic of reaching out to the community directly, particularly in primary care work and community care work, that the community is our caseload. It's not just people who manage to get through the hoops get to see us. And a real beautiful kind of, I suppose, explanation about how these ways of working can reach much beyond our individual clinical consulting room. So that sounds great. And you mentioned in relation to that, of course, the long-standing ambition to write a book, which can reach even broader still, I guess, hopefully. Can you maybe start off by telling me a little bit about what was it like to write a book? What was the experience of writing it?
Oh, God. What was it like? It was really hard. It was really hard, and people had told me it's really hard, but I don't think I realized how, particularly because I'm a perfectionist, and they gave me 6 months to do it. I got a deal from HarperCollins. I was offered a few others as well, but I went with HarperCollins. I couldn't believe I just remember the day I was walking into the library in Dublin, meeting a few publishers and talking to them about writing a book. I was like, how has this happened? But yeah, no, it was really difficult, because they wanted me to do it in 6 months, and I couldn't, not with having a job at the same time. So it was hard. And also I'm a perfectionist. So I ended up writing 120,000 words for a 70,000 word book, and they had to cut 50,000 out. And, you know, that was a difficult thing. But it was also, I mean, I can't believe I've actually done it. You know, to walk into a bookshop and see your book on the shelves, and to, more than that, it's the little messages I get from parents now, you know, just saying, you know, I got one from a parent the other day saying, you know, like you know, that their child was quite anxious during the lockdown and had, you know, anxious behaviors, and that the parent had, until she read my book, she hadn't realized that she was anxious herself, and that she might be passing some of that on to her child in a way, and that, you know, it was really important for her to step back and look at how she was, and that my book had really helped her. So I've had lots of lovely comments from both parents and professionals, because it's a really clear model I use in my book for managing anxiety, which kind of takes a trauma focused look at the brain and how we process information. So it's and then using attachment theory, which is my number one loved theory, to really help parents to connect with their children, and then using compassion focused therapy, which I'm obsessed with since I learned all about it from what's her name, Roisin, oh god, anyway, I interviewed her for this podcast as well, from Evidence-Based Therapy Center. But yeah, it's just, it was a process, but it was worth it, but very difficult for my family. It's not a kind of a, it's something you need to be committed to writing a book, really.
Okay. And again, just to mention, I guess it's a wonderfully titled as well, Love In, Love Out. I think it's a lovely title. Just want to say a little bit about, I've read where you got the name, but want to say a bit about where that name came from?
Yeah, it was when I met this lady or friend called Ruth, and I met her in the post-labor ward, and she was in a bed opposite me, and it was a 6-bedded unit, and we were both kind of struggling. You know, we just had our second babies, and you know, you're very vulnerable after having a baby, and we just started talking, and that friendship grew slowly over time. And then a few years later, we were sitting in a cafe, and I remember, like, I wanted a good title for my book, and I had so many of them. I used to actually spend hours obsessing about a title for my book, instead of actually writing the thing, which you do. And she just said that she uses this mantra when she's having a really difficult parenting moment. She uses this mantra, love in, love out. It kind of helps her to breathe in and to breathe out before she reacts to her children. And for me, that really was reflective of, like, I did this Circle of Security parent training a few years ago, and I was doing it actually so that I could run the group. But it really changed my experience even of being a parent, and realizing this idea of reflective functioning, that we have a choice as parents in how we react to situations with our children. And the love in, love out kind of reminds us that, you know, if you take a breath before you react to your child's needs, which can be expressed in a really difficult way, which can be them shouting at you and, you know, being telling you to F off, being really angry or whatever, that if you take a breath in, that actually, you know, you have a choice and you can react in a different way. But self-care is a really important part of that, and being recharged in the first place is really important. So the first part of my book is very much about bringing parents kind of on a journey of learning what is self-compassion and why is it important for our mental health.
Okay, wonderful. It feels like the book was an integration not only of psychological theory that you'd accrued over the years, but also your own personal experience of parenting as well, and trying to integrate that into one kind of, or a few key messages.
Yeah. It was really hard in a way, because, like, the publisher was saying to me, sometimes it sounds like Mally, the psychologist, because I was trying to put in, like, okay, there's a load of references at the back, but I'd be saying, this study by Felici et al., you know, and about the adverse childhood experiences. And I wanted to bring in all the stuff that I knew and all of that. And then other times it was Mally, the parent, you know, who has struggled and who has learned a lot and who still has a lot of learning to do. And then it was Mally, the child, because actually I was an anxious child. and I was given a placebo drug when I was 9 for my stomach aches, and I really struggled with that. And what I wanted more than anything with my book was to increase that level of understanding between children and parents, because I think very often, and there's a lovely metaphor in my book that's not my own, but it's about um, a child. It's like comparing a child with anxiety to a car with no brakes or with faulty brakes, and how that feels to have faulty brakes. It's almost like when you're anxious, your body is telling you you're anxious. You've all these physical sensations that are telling your brain there's a threat. So if the parent tells the child there's no threat, or tries to distract away from it, or tell them everything is just fine, the threat gets even bigger, because the parent is is being recruited for safety. So I have this acronym that kind of goes SAFE. The S is for self-care, for the parent reflecting on how they react, and for minding themselves. I have this lovely lotus of self-care that looks at ways parents can mind themselves. The A is for anchoring, which is really about helping your child to anchor them to safety, save they're in panic mode, using that adrenaline for things like breathing like a dragon or shaking on purpose. Lots of anchoring strategies, even using polyvagal theory, which is like the parent conveying a sense of safety from their bodies out. And then the F is for feeling felt, which is this lovely idea by Dan Siegel in his Whole Brain Child, which is really helping a child to feel validated and unpacking their worry. So if they say, I'm worried about school tomorrow, asking them, what part of school are you most worried about? Because obviously you have all these black and white thoughts when you're anxious. And then the final part was E, empowerment, which is basically this idea of, you can't get to the reasoning side of children's anxiety and problem solve it until you've done all these other things first. And then I have interviews with a cognitive behavioral therapist who I used to work with in CAMS in Sligo. I have an interview with a mindfulness teacher, and also with, the third person, with a play therapist, Siobhan Prendeville. So like I have, I cover the different ages, and because I also have a certificate in, or diploma in play therapy. So I'm really interested in play.
Okay.
So that's why I kind of incorporated interviews with them and real life case studies. And there are loads of resources for professionals and for parents. So I kind of hope to maybe turn it into a course at some stage. I think it would be very useful for a course, because I've run many courses as a primary care psychologist, but I don't think many of them go deep into the attachment theory and the importance of self-compassion and compassion for parents.
Yeah. No, I mean, what comes across is a real sense of gathering these jewels as you've gone along, and a real wish to impart them now to others, and pack as many of them into the box as possible.
Yes.
Really. Yeah. Sounds wonderful. You've referenced a few different times your family there and yourself, Mally, in this process. And I guess there is an element, to return to an earlier part of our discussion, about exposing yourself in writing books of this nature and having media reports and media interviews in relation to that. Again, I'm just kind of curious about how you found those boundaries between private and personal, and how you navigated that as you went about publicizing a work like your book.
That was really hard, I must say, because you have a journalist ringing you and saying, okay, tell me more about you being an anxious child. And then it'd be like, I'd say, well, I was 9, and, there were difficulties going on. We lived, I suppose we didn't have family around us. We very much moved from country to country to country with little support around us. And then, my parents were having difficulties, and they eventually broke up. They divorced, but they're still really good friends now. But I do remember speaking to one journalist, and the way it was kind of conveyed in the paper, and it was like the Irish Independent or the Irish Times or something, and it was like, it sounded like I was anxious because my parents weren't getting along, and like it wasn't as it wasn't as simple as that. There was a lot of complexity. I was one of those 15% of children who has an anxious disposition. I'm still kind of an highly strung type of person. So as you know, so like that was difficult, because I think, I was kind of sharing that with my parents, going, look, I'm in the Irish Times, or look, my book is in the Irish Times, and kind of, really conscious of how my people, because my mum lives in Ireland, my dad lives in Spain, but how people might perceive that, and how, so I kind of felt in that situation I might have gone too far in that particular interview, so that I made sure in subsequent interviews that I was really clear that it wasn't about parents not getting along necessarily, or that it wasn't, that there was a lot of stuff going on. It wasn't just that. So I veered away a little bit more. I kind of made it more general in terms of my answers, and I was happier with more subsequent interviews. But you have to be really careful, because the journalist is asking you questions and you don't know what they're actually going to write. So you can also say to them, can I check what you're going to write before you publicize it? But very often they don't. They're doing it to a deadline, so you may not get that opportunity to check it. So you have to just be careful. But my parents are okay now. But I just felt, God, maybe I had gone a little bit far, and I just have to be, I'm actually okay sharing my own parenting journey and the way I've struggled as a parent.
Okay.
But I'm not really okay sharing information that's not for me to, it's their information. It's not my, it's, you know, so I have to be careful about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It feels like it was a bit of a journey whereby you're trying to work out where the boundary does lie for you and those around you. And at times just almost working out when you've stepped too far and when you've not gone far enough, and just trial and error to some degree.
It is. Yeah, it is, for sure. I mean, I remember being on a show years ago where I was talking about my own experience of anorexia. And I had said specifically to the person who was interviewing me and to the producer, I stupidly told the researcher that there was something to do with a family member and anorexia or whatever, right? But I won't kind of specify, but that I didn't want to talk about it in the interview, right? So then I wasn't live, actually. It was pre-recorded a half an hour before the actual interview. And I was asked specifically about what I had said I didn't want to talk about. So I did answer it on the telly. But I left that interview and thought, oh my God, I'm really not comfortable with that. So I actually I was actually leaving Dublin, but I rang them and I said, walked back into the building actually. And I just said, look, I don't mean to be difficult, but I did specifically say I didn't want to talk about that. Can you cut that out? Is that possible? And they did. They did cut it out. So I'm kind of glad, but it actually taught me a lesson, which was, don't tell the researcher something that you may not be willing to talk about, because they're obviously going to go for the sensational angle, or they might not have the same care or memory for what you don't want to talk about. You know what I mean?
I do, and yet I'm also struck though by the kind of passion and the bravery to continuously try these things out and thereby learn, because these lessons that you're kind of imparting to us are only possible as a consequence of you going and putting yourself in these positions. So I think that's amazing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing it out of a good place. Do you know what I mean? And I know not everybody, may appreciate that. They might think I'm doing it out of wanting, kind of to be in the media and center of attention. And of course, I am a kind of an exhibitionist type of person as a person, as in I like dancing and having fun and being out there and being sociable. Me, since when I was 18, that's what I was like. I haven't changed. But really there's a really kind of a good there's a sound. This is coming from a sound place for me. That's why I do what I do.
And I think that really comes across too, Mally.
Yeah.
I'm aware that we could talk for ages and ages, and it's been such a pleasure, as it always is. We do need to kind of wrap it up for there. I just want to thank you again for making the time to talk to us on this clinical psychology podcast, Mally.
No problem. I've enjoyed it, really have.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the podcast from Clinical Psychology Today. To find out about future podcasts or to receive the journal free of charge, email us at clinicalpsychologytoday@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.